Before dawn, the stones still held the night's cool. The terrace above the gardens had a low wall of pale granite, worn satin smooth where years of hands had rested and watched storms come stalking up the river. Jaime leaned against that wall and let the cold seep through his tunic, let it hide the heat in his chest that no winter wind had ever learned to quench. The sky over Blackwater Bay was not yet a color so much as a suggestion of light, a slow loosening of darkness, a boundary being questioned, not yet crossed. Far below, the city breathed in its sleep, a complicated animal that muttered and turned and occasionally lashed a dream-tossed tail. The gulls hadn't started their rasping morning chorus. The kitchens were quiet. A single lantern swung faintly in the breeze above the postern gate, painting a swaying coin of light on the cobbles where the guards stamped their feet and pretended not to shiver. He drew a breath so steady it might have been rehearsed and listened for the whisper that had ruled his memory for decades. It came as it always did when he was alone with the hour before sunrise. It came from the dark beneath the city, from the stones and the stale air, and the vaults no one had seen in a lifetime except men in green robes with stained hands. It came from a place where glass jars dreamed of fire. Burn them all. Not a shout, not even an insistence, just a quiet certainty, a thought that had grown teeth. Jaime pressed the edge of his golden hand to the wall and felt nothing but pressure. When he had first learned to move it, hinge by hinge, tendon by counterfeit tendon, he'd clamped a cup between metal fingers until the wood creaked, and told himself that persistence was a kind of strength. He had not told himself it would never be warmth. He had not told himself that what he most wanted to feel its weight upon would not be a goblet, but the hand of his twin. The night remembered it for him anyway. The lemon trees below were small flames in the darkness, their pale fruit like moons hung from low clouds. Cersei had ordered those trees brought by barge when she took the throne, a detail the court had celebrated as a sign of taste. "There is a scent I like," she had told him when he teased her about it. "I want it where I walk." On windless nights, the leaves trapped the sweetness. On mornings like this one, the air slid through the grove and lifted their perfume like a promise. He closed his eyes and let it fill his head, because nothing else would come for a while, not if he met it fairly. Behind him the door to the gallery creaked, and he knew by the way the hinge asked permission who had come. The little cough was unnecessary. Qyburn had a habit of announcing himself twice, once by accident and once on purpose. "You're awake early, my lord," Qyburn said, the silhouette of him crisp against the stone arch as the lantern he carried drew a small ring around himself and no one else. "A good sign, I always think. The industrious man and the careful man are brothers who share a bed." "You have slept with too many metaphors, Qyburn." Jaime did not turn. "Why are you creeping about like a cat who forgot it has bells?" "The queen sent for you," Qyburn said. "She did not send for me, but she allows that I might help you dress for the day, as I often do. I have learned to put on my own shirt, but not your own armor, if you mean to wear it. The buckles are placed to vex those who have lost a hand, and there is a particular malice in the left shoulder strap this morning that would make grown men cry." Jaime forced himself to smile, because that is what his face did when he wished to be practiced. "And how would you know this, Qyburn? Did the strap confide?" Qyburn moved closer. The lantern raised the wrinkles under his eyes into small cliffs and turned his mouth into a thin wound. "I was in the armory. I have a habit of examining the seam between a man and his protection, a surgeon's interest. And the queen, in her chambers. She has not slept." Qyburn's mouth made a shape that might have been respect or pity if it came from someone else. "There are papers to sign and hands to slap and a stubborn goose of a lord to pluck in the solar. The crown is a field where weeds spring up overnight. And you are the gardener. I pull and plant and find nourishment in what the soil gives in return," Qyburn said. "Do you think the queen would like to see you before or after you break your fast?" "She asked me to ask. I have no appetite." He turned then, because not looking at something never made it disappear. "Tell me something I do not know, Qyburn." The man bowed until the lantern winked at the floor. "The city sleeps and the river is asleep and a pale fish is dreaming of a hook. The men at the postern gate gamble with stones marked with charcoal. The older one cheats and the younger one has not yet learned to notice. The kitchen boy forgot to salt the dough last night and will be punished by bread. That is what I know at this hour. And this? There is a rumor moving through the narrow alleys like a rat that has found ease and purpose. It says there are fires laid beneath the city. I know about fires, Jaime said, too quickly. The cold that had seeped into him slipped, turned slick, and he pressed his golden hand harder to the wall as if the stone might pull him down to where the whispers waited with their old friend. Qyburn cocked his head like a crow. Of course you do, he said softly. You are a man made by decisions that smelled of smoke. Forgive me. Do not ask for things you have not earned. He pushed away from the wall and felt the private tremor in him settle. Tell the queen I am coming. And tell the armorer to lace the straps as if they were meant for a man with only one hand. I will tell him to do it himself, Qyburn said, and I will watch until I think he has understood the lesson. He turned to go and hesitated. There is a word T. Hat belongs to certain men. It is written in our law, but it lives in our songs. Kingslayer. It is a word that keeps its teeth even when it does not bite. You have never asked me for a softer one. Find one in your anatomy book and I will consider it, Jaime said. Bone binder. Sinew saver. My mother would have liked those. Qyburn's smile was small and all his own. She would have liked that you can still joke about it, he said, and withdrew into the corridor with the lantern that could not decide which way to throw its light. When Jaime entered the corridor, the tapestries were a dark procession of hunts he had stopped seeing years ago. He moved as if he had slept in the hall and risen into it, as if the stone had thrown him off like a patient horse. His boots made a respectful sound on the flags. A girl with a pitcher scurried into a side passage to avoid him, the water within slapping its throat. Half the palace had learned to step out of his way on that account alone. Water spilled, eggs dropped, a curtain pulled askew by hands too nervous for their work. The other half stepped out of his path because they had eyes and a sense of story, and stories about men like him were delicious and contagious and bad for digestion. He did not begrudge them. He had long ago stopped begrudging anyone their appetite for tales that made other men larger than life and therefore not obliged to live it properly. 2 household guards in crimson livery stood before Cersei's door and straightened so crisply it sounded like someone snapping twigs. Their plumes were damp with mist and stooped under their own weight. One of them, older, a mouth that slouched when he wasn't thinking about it, met Jaime's gaze and then failed to pretend he hadn't. Jaime gave him the courtesy of pretending he was invisible anyway. He lifted his golden hand and rapped the knuckles once against the door. The sound was a small bell struck under a rug. Enter, came her voice. Not harsh, not yet. Simply a shape he had been born hearing, even before he learned words for anything else. She stood by the window, a long shape against the pale. The gown she had chosen for the hour, a deep red that found its own light and held onto it greedily. Her hair had grown, and in the dimness she seemed to wear a crown of shade at her temples where the gold didn't catch. The room smelled of roses and wine and the skin of a person who did not set the goblet down even when she knew better. Papers like snowdrifts lay across her desk. A knife lay in their midst, an ink-stained blade that made the parchment look like the throat of something that had bled too much. You are early, Cersei said, and then, when he had come 3 steps closer, no, you are exactly on time. I did not know there was a clock in your head, he said. There is a clock in everyone's head who fears they have too little time. She did not sit. She did not come to him. They measured the room with their restraint as they always had, the way some siblings throw stones into a river and count the ripples of the other's impatience. Did Qyburn find you on the terrace to tell you I was waiting? He will pretend to be helpful even when he is doing exactly as he would have done. He found me to tell me there are fires laid beneath the city. He watched her and saw the smallest flinch, the one only he would have known to watch for. The flesh under her left eye tightened and smoothed, a breath that had been startled and then taught itself manners. Are there? Cersei moved her hand across the desk and nudged the blade without quite touching it. The city is a woman with a secret. Sometimes she whispers it in her sleep. Sometimes she bites the man who thinks he has the right to turn her over. Which do you suppose she is this morning? Tell me there aren't, he said, too quickly, too soft. His voice made the same error his body had made at the terrace wall. It confessed how much he needed to hear something decent in order to continue believing he could be a decent man. She turned to him then, fully, and the light from the window reached for her like a hand that wanted to say it had been chosen. Her eyes had a brightness that had once made the world make sense to him, a brightness that he had mistaken for a lamp held up against any darkness whatsoever. Now that same brightness had the thinness of a blade rather than the promise of one. "There are fires laid beneath this city," she said calmly, "because this city has been promised to people who wish to pick its bones and call it supper. There are fires because the river will bring dragons and knives and banners no one asked to see. There are fires because sometimes a queen has to remember she is also a mother." He stepped forward. The guards outside the door were only a story. Qyburn was only a glove pretending to be a hand. In this room, the two of them had made and unmade so many plans that the list would have read like a prayer and a confession interleaved. His sword was not on him. He had come without it because he had wanted to be a man before he was a weapon. Men could speak to women. Weapons only awaited orders. "You will not do it," he said carefully. Cersei's mouth curved. A small sculpture that suggested laughter was a luxury she would buy later when her coffers were full of others' grief. "Do what?" "Don't." He heard the anger in himself and brushed it. He had learned to comb it smooth without tearing too much of his own hair. "Do not make me say it and pretend you do not already know what I mean." "Say it," she said. "Say it in this room where we do not lie to each other unless we are obliged." "You will not burn this city," Jaime said. She looked at him for a long breath and did not blink. "You are sentimental," she said. "It is becoming on you when no one is watching. It has made you kinder. Kindness is a poor cloak in a storm. I am speaking as a man who has seen a king grin when he spoke about flame," Jaime said. "I am speaking as a man who strangled his honor with his hands and left it flailing under a throne. I am speaking as a man who still hears words he did not want to learn. He did not say them. He did not give them to her. I am speaking to a queen who has the power to be better." Cersei looked down at the blade smudged with ink and picked it up between two fingers. Her nails were crescent moons with blood beneath them, where she had scratched herself on the edge of something unlovely. She wiped the blade on a bit of parchment and turned it, so it caught the uncertain light. "Better," she said. "Do you know what better looks like from a throne? It looks like weakness unless you teach everyone to call it another word." "Call it rule then," he said. "Call it wisdom. Call it love for a thing greater than yourself. Do not venture into words you spent years refusing to define," Cersei said softly. "When you left me to pluck these definitions alone. And I did." A pause took the room in its fist. The lemons below breathed again. Noise came from far away, the first wagon creaking toward a market, the soft clatter of a chain being gathered at the wharf, and then was set outside the door like a basket, not invited in. "I did not leave to learn new words," Jaime said, "but to find out whether the old ones had been translated incorrectly. And they had." She slid the small knife into the paper again. "A thin grave. Our enemies will come. They will not knock politely. The dragons are not stories anymore, and the men from sands and snow have learned to be patient as wolves. I am a mother, and there is nothing more dangerous than a mother who is not believed. So you will burn them." "I will burn what I must," she said, and for a moment he saw the girl they had been at 10, sitting in a corridor with their backs against stone after some minor scolding from a septa who had never understood they were not two people but one pair. That girl had eyes for dragons in a storybook. This queen had hands for the hinges of the world. I am told there are ways to contain it. The learned men are good at alchemy. They can put fire in a jar and teach it to wait. They can teach it to wait, Jaime said, but not to forgive. He stepped closer, so close that if he'd had the hand he was born with he would have reached for her then. He had learned the shape of her face by heart 100 times. He had been a man who thought one face could be home. "You asked me once to be your sword. I will be your sword still, but not the last sword the city sees." "Ah," she said, and something like tiredness moved over her face without quite settling. "You think you are saving me from a stain I cannot wash out. You think you are saving this city from something that has already been lit by a different match. You think. I know that if you do this, I will not be able to love you. That is the smallest truth. And if you do this, there will be no one left to judge whether that matters." The words hung, He left them hanging so they could learn their own weight before he took them back. Cersei set the knife down, this time carefully, as if it might cut the thing she intended it to. "You came to tell me what I will not do," she said, like a man telling the tide to stay for supper. "I came to ask for the tide's name," he said, "so that when I speak to it, it hears itself." She frowned, and then her eyes moved to the shuttered bed and back again. A flicker so brief anyone else would have guessed at a draft. "I have not slept," she repeated. "Sit with me." He sat. She did not move toward him. They occupied a small piece of air that had been there since infancy and belonged to no one else, even when the bed had belonged to others. The chair under him was carved with lions so earnest in their triumph that he wanted to turn it upside down and let it be a stool. Cersei rested her hands on the desk and let her fingers find a pattern in the grain, a habit she had when she needed something she could control. "When we were young," she said, "Father told me that a queen has two bodies. One that is seen when she passes through the city, one that is not seen except when it fails. The seen body is a piece of theater and a goblet of wine. The unseen is a chest of iron and keys that bite the hand that holds them. I have held the keys until my palms learn to be numb. I will not drop them because a man who hates me intends to arrive with the courtesy of cannons. Do not mistake the iron chest for the city," he said. "What do you want me to say, Jaime?" Her voice, for a moment, cracked and sealed itself as impeccably as a jar. "That the girl in the corridor still believes in knights? She does not. She never should have. I do not want you to say anything. I want you to decide something that looks like life." There it was, the small flinch again, the one under her left eye. He had watched blizzards at sea. He had watched armies begin to run. He had watched his own hand being cut away and thought, "Remember this. Remember the world's speed when it wants to be cruel." But nothing had taught him to watch that flinch as well as she had. It had begun as a tell and become a prayer. His chest hurt with it. She leaned forward and opened a drawer and took out a small wax tablet, the kind a child might scrawl in and smooth with a warm hand to begin again. On it were words written with such pressure the stylus had dug into the wax and streaked it. A list of names, some crossed, some circled, some with a ring of nothing around them, as if something had burned too hot for comment. "These are the people the city belongs to," she said. "They will sell it to whomever offers a song that flatters them most. They will praise me as long as I am useful, and then they will use my corpse as a banner. I have learned this from men I paid to smile and men who smiled for free. Cross mine out," he said. "Then we begin." She looked up at Him, and for a heartbeat he could not tell if her eyes were wet or if dawn had finally decided to commit itself to light. "I cannot," she said. "Try." She put the stylus down. "No." He stood. The movement was slow and deliberate because he had learned that the man who moved quickly in a room like this was not a man anymore but a blade. He did not want to be a blade. Not yet. The lemons breathed again. The lantern in the corridor swayed. Somewhere in the palace, a rooster crowed and realized it had been too early and tried to pull the sound back into its throat. The silence it left was perfect and excruciating. "Then I will go below," Jaime said, "and speak to the men who wear green. I will speak to them about jars and tunnels and how fire does not negotiate. I will ask them where the caches are they did not show me when I asked last year. I will frighten them if I must. I am still able to do that. I would rather not." Her mouth became a line so straight it hurt to look at. "Do not go to them," she said. "Do not make me choose between you and the city," he said, and for once did not make the words polite. "I am tired of being a man who cannot say two things are sacred." "You will always choose me," she said. "That is the joke you do not find as funny as I do." He looked at her then in a way he had avoided for months, the kind of look that was a small murder in itself. "If you lay fires under this city," he said quietly, "I will not choose you. You think you will have time to choose. I will make time." There was nothing in his voice that was a threat. It was only a piece of information that had arrived at the table needing to be set down. Cersei's eyes moved over his face as if trying to remember something she had not thought she would need again. She nodded once, almost to herself. "Go speak to your learned men," she said. "Ask them what they have learned from glass. Bring me their answer and we will laugh at it together." He did not kiss her. He did not reach for her hand or her hair or the second life they had sometimes built out of silence. He turned and left her in the room with the knife and the names in the wax and the lemons wrapping the morning up so slowly it felt like mercy. The guards outside pretended they hadn't listened and failed. He let them. The sept where the alchemists kept their rooms had once been a pleasant place for sleep. The old monastic stones had a talent for dusk and a discipline for dawn. The men in green had given them new talents. For secrets, for the small cruel thrill of knowing something others did not. They were earnest, awful boys who'd grown into watchful professors of the unsecured hinge. Jaime walked through their halls and watched the candlelight hesitate around him, as if deciding whether it was wise to illuminate this man, the Grand Master of the Guild, who now styled himself Supreme, met him in a chamber that smelled like copper coins and damp linen. The man's hair was a pious gray. He had eyes that had learned to keep their lids half down because they liked the feeling of spying on the world from behind their own lashes. He bowed to Jaime and pretended to be impressed by the metal hand, as if it were another of his jars. "Lord Commander," the man said, and realized as he said it that he had chosen a title that had a layer of dust on it. "Ser Jaime, to what do we owe the honor?" "I want to know where the fires sleep," Jaime said. The man spread his hands as if he were about to demonstrate a trick with a dove. "Fire does not sleep," he said gently. "It rests with a knife under its pillow." "Where are the jars?" Jaime said, and moved a step closer. "You know precisely what I am asking. Do not make me speak about pillows or knives." "Sir," the alchemist began with mild reproach, "the guild has always worked with the crown. We guard what must be guarded. We release only what is." "The jars," Jaime said, his patience tightening into a small noose. "There are caches beneath the city, halls where the air remembers heat. There are vaults where your men have walked and called themselves kings of light. Take me there." "Ah," the man said, and was clever and limitlessly cowardly enough not to try to deny it. "The Queen is prudent. The Queen is mindful of. The Queen is asking you to keep secrets from me," Jaime said. "She forgets that I have already made the decision she fears most in the world. I am not afraid to make it again. Bring a lantern. We are going walking." They walked. The path was narrower than memory but wider than dream. The city above them had its own veins, and this was one of them. A long dark vessel full of stillness and the occasional tremor when carts rolled overhead. Jaime ducked under beams and scraped his shoulder against walls that still remembered what they had been before men stacked them. The air was cool and tasted faintly of oil and old heat. The lantern's flame was a small, neat mouth nibbling at the darkness and spitting it out behind them. They reached the first of the chambers, and the alchemist lifted the lantern so that its light would catch on something and make it meaningful. The something responded obediently. Rows and rows of green glass, fat-bellied jars with little shoulders, each sealed with a lid and a device stamped on wax. The sight was obscene the way a room full of cradles is obscene when no children are coming. Jaime swallowed and counted without meaning to, a reflex born of men who had learned that numbers were sometimes the only defense against fear. There were more than there had been in his youth. There were always more. "Do you remember?" the alchemist said softly. "The day you killed a king? Do you remember how a city was spared because he did not pull on a chain that would have sung the old names of fire? We remember it here. We drink to it at our feasts. We call it the day the guild proved its worth." "You call it the day I proved mine," Jaime said. "And then you hid more RS in more rooms." "Sir?" the man said, spreading his hands again, and then lowered them when he saw how the gesture looked against the green. "We placed precautions. We placed warnings. We trained a generation to understand that fire is a law with no parliament. This is not chaos. This is preparation." "Who holds the key?" Jaime said. "There are keys and there are instructions. There is a man who knows and a man who knows that man's name. The Queen has asked that." "The Queen has asked," Jaime said, and moved so quickly he became exactly what he had feared. A blade, made not of steel but of speed and anger. He took the lantern from the alchemist's hand and held it very close to one of the jars without shaking. "Tell me where all of them are. Not some. Not most. All." The alchemist's calm cracked in the way porcelain does, not loudly, with lines that did not show until you try to pour wine. "Ser Jaime," He said in a voice that had never learned to be at home with fear. "You must not. Tell me," Jaime said. "Imagine that I am a worse man than the king who wanted to use you like a bell rope. Imagine that I am a man who will spill this lantern and watch this room stop being a room. Imagine that your blood and your faith make a little green noise I will forget by supper. Tell me where they are." The man told him, not because he believed Jaime would do it. No one who had read even a sliver of the story of this man believed he would ignite a city to prove a point. But because there is something about a lantern tilted toward a jar that makes a mind brittle. He told him about the vault under the Street of Flower and the one beneath the September where poor men were told their suffering made them beloved of gods. He told him about a cache near the docks and one beneath the guild hall of the goldsmiths. He told him about the trick of damp and the superstition of mice and the man who pretended to be a simple custodian while knowing that one ladder rung in one tunnel loosened enough would crumble a wall that separated an old sewer from a room of jars. He told him about the path no one used because it had been promised to a day that had not yet arrived but liked to be ready. Jaime listened. He did not interrupt. He took the names into himself the way a man gulping water in summer takes it without dignity. He paced the rooms and looked at the jars and found himself thinking absurdly of infants in cradles again. Rows of possible songs. He knew he could not find them all in one morning, nor one day, nor likely one week. He knew the world was always larger than a man finds comfortable when he suddenly understands that he must save it with his bare hands. When he had the lantern again and they were back near the stairs and the daylight in it had begun to believe itself, he turned to the alchemist and said, "You will bring me the man who holds the key to the thing that makes these jars more than jars." The alchemist's voice was threadbare. "The queen." "Will do what queens do," Jaime said, "and I will do what men do when they have trained themselves to be ashamed less carefully than they train themselves to fight." He left the man at the foot of the stair and climbed into morning. The sky had become an honest blue. The gulls had discovered their light. The city reeked comfortably of fish guts and bread. The world returned, as it always had, from its dream of disaster like a man who is sobered up long enough to pay yesterday's bill. He crossed the yard behind the guild hall and paused to watch a cat stalk something in the herbs, its tail telling the truth about what it thought of patience. He envied it, briefly. Patience, single-mindedness, a life arranged around one precise hunger. When he reached the palace again, the sun was on the eastern walls and made the stone look as if it had been washed and left to dry on a line. The guards were still at Cersei's door, and the older one still had the mouth that slouched, and the younger one had learned something about lying with his face. Jaime lifted his golden hand to knock and did not. He stood a long time with his knuckles raised and thought about the fact that a hand that could not feel could still remember. He lowered it and opened the door without knocking. Cersei was where he had left her, except that she was standing and there was a goblet in her hand. She had not had that much wine. He could tell by the way it sat in the glass, untroubled by the tremor of her wrist. On the desk, the wax tablet with names had gained a new mark, a small circle around a certain house in the city known for its disrespect for kingships of all kinds. He recognized the gesture. "I see you, and I am not yet certain whether to kill you or call you friend." "I went," he said. "I saw. And there are more jars than you will admit to me on your bravest day." He closed the door carefully. "You will not use them. You still imagine the world bends to your verbs." She turned the goblet in her hand. The wine kept its balance. "You forget that sometimes the only word that describes the world is. Is?" he repeated. "There are jars. There are men who will do what you ask them to do for a coin and an excuse to call their fear piety. There is a city that breathes like a beast. There is a queen who can choose. Do not mistake what is for what must be." "Jaime," she said. His name in her mouth had always had a little gravity in it, as if she had invented the word and could reassign it to someone else if he forgot to behave. "If they come and they take me." He moved forward before she finished. The light was bright now and the lemons were singing to themselves in the garden. He looked at her and saw, not the court mask or the mother's ferocity or the woman who had learned to drink like a clever soldier, but the girl from the corridor again, the one whose eyes were a map of a country that had not yet been folded and creased by history. It undid him a little. It always had. He took that small undoing and set it on a shelf in his head and chose not to pick it up today. "I will not let them take you," he said. But if you try to take the city first, I will stop you. You will stop me? She repeated, and made the words considerate, as if trying them on the way a woman tries on a brooch in a shop, to see whether it makes her more or less of herself. How? He had imagined a dozen answers to the question. He had imagined locking her door and posting a guard more loyal to him than to the crown. He had imagined hauling Qyburn out by his soft throat and explaining anatomy to him in a new way. He had imagined taking the keys, the literal ones and the figurative ones, and holding them in his metal hands so tightly they cut him anyway. He had not imagined this would be the moment she would ask him, the private morning, the lemons and the light. He thought of all the ways men avoid the truth when it arrives early and unannounced. He took none of them. "I will kill you," he said. She did not start. She did not faint. She did not laugh. She looked at him instead with the care he had once learned from her, the care you take with an expensive dish balanced on a tray in a crowded room. She put the goblet down without looking away and put her hand on the table and tapped a knuckle once against the wood, as if telling herself she was still made of it. "You will kill me?" she said, and nodded slightly, as if a fact had been confirmed and added to a list. "If you try to kill them," he said, "all of them. If you take the choice away from everyone because you fear what choice might look like. If you light a fire because you do not like the dark the day has chosen." He had never been more still. She had never been more so. The air between them had a membrane to it, as if one could press a hand against it and feel whether the other had warmth. "You talk like a man who believes in fate," she said at last. "I talk like a man who has spent years pretending he didn't," he said. "And I talk like a man who knows exactly how much time a lantern has before it finds a jar." "Would you do it now?" she asked, almost lightly, moving one finger on the wood and tracing the scar the ink blade had left there. It was a beautiful line, that scar. It had an artist's self-respect. "Before breakfast, like a chore? Take the head of the queen to save the city before the city wakes up enough to decide whether it is grateful." No, his voice was a door that had been shut with care so no one in the next room would be startled. "I would do it when you gave me no choice. I am asking you not to hand me that choice." She walked past him then and paused by the window and looked out at the lemons and the river as if they were two suitors tugging their forelocks. "You think I am mad," she said without accusation. "I think you are afraid," he said gently. "And I think the world has taught you that fear deserves to be fed." "Fear does not deserve to be fed," she said. "It demands it. It is a tenant who rouses you at night and asks for soup." "I will make you another tenant," he said. "One who sleeps better and pays on time." She turned and smiled at him then, a smile that contained 20 years and the night by the lake, and the first victory they'd won as teens, and the moment she put the crown on her head and dared the world to knock. "You have always believed you can build me a better house," she said. "And you have always believed that a house is a siege engine if you are clever enough." They stood like that, two architects arguing with the plans in their heads. In other lives, they would have built actual palaces together with columns that balanced history on their heads and floors that creaked where lovers liked to pace at night. In this one, they were the palace. "Go," she said after a time. "Take your lists. Take your fears. Go to your men and tell them a queen will not set this city on fire because she does not need to. Go spend your morning bullying jars." "I will not bully them," he said. "I will carry them out of the city if I must." "They will break," she said coolly, "and then we will both be the story we have practiced." He left. There was nothing else to do in that exact moment that would have mattered. There are shapes that arguments must take, and time does not allow shortcuts even to those who have served it so well. He spent the day in the tunnels and in rooms that smelled of oil and damp and the old defeat of men whose ideas were better than their execution. He spoke to a dozen men whose hands were stained the same grayish-green and convinced them that the keys and the levers and the chain were not best kept near the thing they governed. He removed 2 keystones from the wrong place and set them on a table like a heart surgeon who has decided that this patient will live because he is an artist, not because he is a god. He sent boys he trusted least to run messages he trusted most to men in the watch whose loyalty was to their own wives and children rather than to the crown. In the afternoon, he drank water that tasted like a bell and ate half a loaf of the bread. The cook had salted too late and told himself that bitter was a kind of flavor. Above ground, The day passed as days did in a city that loves its routine because it is the only God that has ever fed it consistently. The markets opened, loudly, and with the particular laughter of men who have sold the same onion to 4 different housewives by telling each a different truth. The baker's boys swatted flies and learned how to whistle and how to pretend they had not learned anything else. A woman with a baby on her back bought a ribbon she could not afford and practiced her smile in the reflection in a cup. 2 men argued about a God neither believed in because the argument felt good on the tongue. Power moved through the streets the way heat does, invisible and instinctive, collecting in alleys and under awnings and on the steps of buildings so old they had learned to keep their counsel. In the palace, Cersei held court and made 3 lords wish they had practiced a story with fewer holes in it. She signed papers that moved money from one box to another without changing its mind about men like her. She sent Qyburn to speak to men who believed in knives and men who believed in whispers and men who believed in the sort of ledgers only certain eyes may see. She stood very still at a window for an hour and breathed and did not think. She ate 2 figs and a flat cake that flaked perfectly. She remembered a morning when she had run through a hallway because she had learned something exciting and no one had been there to hear it, and decided that memory had been misfiled. She laughed once, very quietly, at a joke only she would ever find acceptable. She watched the sun starting toward the river and thought, "There is a personal half of the sky no one knows about except me." Then she decided that was a ridiculous sentence and was pleased to have the discipline to admit it. Evening came in a way that felt like a man opening a door with a secret in his pocket. The light became a liquid you could pour between your fingers if you invented a way to do so. The palace found its shadows and lit them and invited its candles to behave in their best table manners. Jaime washed his hands and watched the water run off the metal without telling him anything. He changed his doublet because the dust in the tunnels had ambitions and did not intend to stop at cloth. He did not put on his sword for supper, because there are rooms where steel is not decor. He put a knife in his boot, because there are rooms where a man insists on borrowing against the future. They supped alone, because Cersei had discovered not long after acquiring a crown that the only time the food tasted as it should was when there were no men present this side of fear to admire it. She ate with the same concentration she applied to everything now, even to laughter when it came. Jaime forced himself to follow the rhythm. He spoke of things that could be spoken of without bleeding. He told her about a man he had once known in the Reach whose idea of a battle had included 4 boats and an argument about poetry. She told him about a lady who had come to court with a hawk and a plan to find it mates among the other ladies' slippers. They broke bread and the bread obliged by breaking in clean lines. They drank wine and it behaved like a building with good strong beams. The lemons sang without words through the open windows, and the palace allowed them to, as if it had learned to enjoy their small arrogance over the weeks of their presence. Cersei set her cup down and looked at him across the table that had seen them born, nearly, born into a shared fate. "Do you remember the prophecy?" she asked. He had not allowed himself to think the word. He had taught himself other things instead. Ride, how to dismount without the old ache, how to use the golden hand to turn a page without tearing it. He could not hide from the question. "Yes," he said. "She never spoke to you. She spoke to me. But you stood behind me and you heard. You remember the words that were not meant for you. I remember the look on your face when you got older and realized prophecy is a game in which the gods keep the rules to themselves. I was told I would be queen until a younger and more beautiful one came," she said, and did not bother with the rest, because they both had learned that certain words were a map the soul walked even when your feet were stubborn. "And I was told," she stopped. "I know," he said. "If you stop me," she said, "you will give her the future she was promised. The city will still be hers. The songs will belong to her. She will smile out of tapestries and the faces of children. I will be a word men teach their daughters to pronounce as a warning. If I stop you," he said, "I will give the city back to people who know how to live in it. I will give you back to yourself, if you allow it." She looked at him as if a pain in her side had stirred and decided to try again. "There is a mercy worse than cruelty," she said. "You practice it." "I am not merciful," he said. "I am frightened. I am bored of what fear has made of me. I am trying to invent a new part for myself in the little play." "It is a comedy this week," she said. "Next week it will be a tragedy." We have never been good at placing them on the calendar. They were quiet. They finished eating. The candles settled. The room learned the smell of smoke without panic. He wanted to stand and pace, but knew better. He wanted to reach for her and knew better. He wanted to go to the alchemists again and count like a man in a fever and knew better. He waited, because he had told himself that patience was a habit you carved into your bones and not a poem you recited. When she rose, she did so like a command written in a small hand on a large page. He followed her into the next room because that is what a man does whose life has been a series of arrivals in doorways where she is. She paused by the window again. The city was a scatter of light and voices, a great murmuration of small lives tumbling over each other in alleys and on stairs and in bedrooms and around tables. The river was a loop of black silk with the street lamps pricked into it like careless embroidery. The air was soft on his face. The lemon trees were still insisting on their argument with night. "Come," she said, not turning. He came. She put her head against his chest in a gesture that would have been familiar to anyone who had been born a twin. He felt the weight of it, and then he felt the absence of his missing warmth more acutely than he had in weeks. The metal hand stroked her hair in a motion that meant to be comfort and could not quite find the texture for it. The other hand hung at his side with the old uselessness that had taught him tricks and shames in equal measure. "Do not do this," he said, not meaning the embrace. She did not answer. Her breath was warm. The city had found its night voice and would keep it for hours. He stood there with the person who had been the explanation for everything and thought, "The world is a room you cannot leave if you keep naming the same wall." He moved before he knew he had decided to. The motion had the quality of a debt being paid on the exact day it is due. Unsurprising if you have been paying attention. Shocking if you have been deliberately looking at something else. He stepped back, took her face in his hand, the good one, the hand that could still feel, and looked at her as if looking were a profession. Her eyes took him in and did not blink. He did not draw a blade, because it would have made a sound the room would have repeated and repeated until he was old. He took the knife from his boot without ceremony. A small, efficient thing, a tool rather than a story. Cersei did not speak. He did not speak. He was careful. He had learned to be. When he moved, it was clean. When he stopped, it was done. He held her until her body figured out it was heavier without a future. He held her as if the gods might write to him later and ask for a description of what love looks like at the last moment, and he did not want to be accused of exaggeration. He lowered her to the floor with a ridiculous gentleness because he had learned too much about why men do brutal things and then tell themselves a bedtime story. He put the knife away because it was finished and he did not want the room to keep seeing it. He pressed his forehead to hers and found that the old children's trick still worked. The one where you pretend that by touching skulls you can share a thought and keep a secret. He said nothing aloud, because the words would not have pleased anybody. The world did not stop. It never does. Outside the palace, a man laughed at a joke that would not survive the night. An orange cat knocked over a pail and ran as if the pail had planned revenge. A barge struck softly against a piling like a lover murmuring in sleep. High up in a tower, a girl who had never been kissed touched her own mouth and wondered why it knew anything at all. Jaime waited. He made his breathing into a thing that would not scare the room. He closed her eyes because leaving them open felt like a cruelty even he had not earned the right to practice. He smoothed her hair as if she were asleep and would be angry to wake if it lay the wrong way. He put his golden hand against her cheek like a man willing a mask to be warm. He sat there a long time in the habit of waiting, and then he stood because standing is what you must do if you intend to change anything. He adjusted his doublet and returned to the dining table and drank the last of her goblet so that he would have something of hers inside him that was not a ghost. He set the cup down and listened for a change in the palace's breathing. There was none. He went to the door. The guards looked at his face and at his hands and at his eyes and did not know what they were looking at. He spoke in a voice he had learned for command, the one that makes men jump because they are relieved someone has decided what they must be. "Fetch Qyburn," he said. "Tell him the queen fainted. Tell him to bring no parade." They ran. He closed the door again. He knelt and lifted her again and placed her on the bed because leaving her on the floor felt like a confession he did not yet wish to make. He crossed her arms as if she were a lady in a story painted on a chapel wall. He smoothed the covers because the eye loves order when the soul is a riot. He stood by the bed like a man at a dock waiting for a ship he knows is not coming. Qyburn came without the lantern. He had had the sense, or the forewarning, to bring 2 assistants who looked as if they had been stolen from a quiet monastery where they had been learning to make soup. He entered the room like a man entering a chapel where he had once committed a blasphemy so elegant it became doctrine. He saw what he saw. He made a small noise with his mouth, and then he did not make any other for a while. He gestured, and the assistants moved with a care that might have been reverence or fear. Jaime watched them the way a man watches carpenters repair a roof he knows he himself should have fixed years ago. Qyburn lifted his head at last, the question in his eyes perfectly polite. "How?" he asked. "Quickly," Jaime said. "Why?" he asked. "To save the city," Jaime said. Qyburn nodded as if he had been waiting for that answer and had already written it down somewhere he could visit later with a drink. He moved toward the bed and then stopped and inclined his head to Jaime in a bow that was as old as certain courtesies and as new as an understanding between 2 men in a very small club. "What would you have me do?" Qyburn asked. "Announce that the queen is dead," Jaime said. "Announce it quietly and then loudly. Announce it so that the city hears it and finds its knees and makes them stop shaking. Announce it in a way that leaves me a door to walk through." Qyburn rubbed his mouth with 2 fingers, a gesture he had when words needed to be shepherded. "You will take responsibility," he said, in the tone of a teacher asking a student to point to the correct bone. "Yes. You will take the word for it," Qyburn said. "You will take the name." "I have carried worse names," Jaime said. The old habit came to him like a familiar pain. Kingslayer. He let it in and did not argue with it. He thought about what the bards would do with a story about a man who killed his sister to save a city. He thought about how they would get the facts wrong and the details right. He thought about how the only thing that would matter was whether the jars broke or did not. "Shall we?" Qyburn said, and his assistants moved with quiet competence to begin the business of making a queen into a body the palace would know how to mourn. Jaime watched their hands. He thought about the precise motion his own had made. He did not look away. He left the room when there was nothing for his eyes to do except make a future for what they had seen. In the corridor, the guards tried to arrange their feet into a pattern that would make them seem like a wall. He walked past them and the tapestries that had never looked at anything, and into a hall that had taught generations of men how to bow. He did not bow. He went to the chamber where the handful of men he trusted would be at this hour. Men who had learned to read his face and were modest enough to pretend they could not. They arrived, Ser Adam with the scar that made his lip look like it had been taught an extra word and had decided never to say it. Haber with his eyebrows like hedges. Lou's boy with the sandals too small for his feet because he had not admitted to himself that he had grown. Jaime shut the door and was, for a brief second, grateful that the world still allowed doors to be shut. "The queen is dead," he said. He did not dress it. He did not let them guess. He took the word and laid it on the table like a head. Haber made a sound like a cough and then decided it would be braver to be a silence. Adam's hand went to his own sword because habit is apparent. The boy did not know what to do with his feet. "I killed her," Jaime said. They did not look at each other. They did not ask why in 3 letters. They waited for him to tell them where to point their loyalty now that they had been asked to abandon the bed where it had learned its language. "She meant to burn the city if it were cornered," he said. "There are jars beneath us and more jars where you would think only rats were clever. I have spent the day making sure there are fewer threads that lead to them. I have not spent it well enough to become a man who sleeps a full night." "You did what you have done before," Adam said slowly, as if the sentence had to be walked with in order to be survived. "You saved us." "I did something that will only be called saving if we make it so," Jaime said. "We will need a story, and we will need to keep our hands very clean while telling it." "The Dragon Queen," Haber said. His voice had a habit of leaning against a wall, so it wouldn't fall over. "She will come." "She will," Jaime said. "And she will expect a head on a spike and a city on its knees. I intend to give her neither and both in a way that keeps our children alive." "Whose children?" the boy said. "Because youth is practicing its insolence against old accidents." "Everyone's," Jaime said. They made a plan. It was a plan of the sort men make when they have lived long enough to know that the worst thing you can do is pretend you have more time than you've been given. They sent a man to the September to tell the High Septon that the bells would be rung tonight, not in celebration, but in warning. They sent 3 to the guild halls that mattered and 2 to the ones that didn't, because those were the ones that often proved their importance at the worst possible time. They sent for the commander of the city watch and told him a story that would make him sleep like a man paid cash in advance. They sent for the ship's captains who would listen and for the one who would not, because the one who would not needed to be taken into account when he went where men like him went with money in their ears. They sent a boy to the kitchens to tell the cooks to feed the guards as if they were about to try to tame a storm. They did not send to the Lannister quartermaster because that man would come of his own accord when he smelled the rumor. They set the room in order as if it had been a table for dinner. When they had done what men do with hours that are not quite enough, Jaime went and found the person he had kept at a distance all afternoon without meaning to, Tyrion. They met in a loggia where the air moved and did not apologize for moving. Tyrion sat in a chair he had dragged to one side, so his head would receive the draft and his temper would be too preoccupied to say what it thought. He had a goblet that he appeared to be using to measure the day against previous ones. He looked at Jaime and then looked past him as if the news had arrived a moment before, and he had just been waiting for the mouth it would choose to come from. "So," Tyrion said, "at last." "At last," Jaime said. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Tyrion said dryly. "Few men get to kill a sister and call it heroism. You have always been efficient in your tragedies." Jaime took the barb as a man takes a splinter from a railing without his hand leaving the wood. "I would ask for your counsel," he said. "I would also ask for your forgiveness, but I know too much about you to ask it now." "You want to know what she will do?" Tyrion asked. "She will do nothing. That is the point." "Not her," Jaime said. "The Dragon Queen." "Ah?" Tyrion said, and his face rearranged itself with the carefulness of a man who had practiced being 2 kinds of person. "She will have opinions. She always has. She will want the city to surrender," Jaime said. "I intend to offer her a word she has not practiced hearing." "And which is that?" "Not yet." Tyrion's mouth twitched. "There is a great deal of poetry wrapped in those 2 syllables." "I did not mean it as a poem," Jaime said. "I meant it as wages. She will have the city, but she will have it when the city is ready to give itself, not while it still has to be peeled like an orange from its own skin." "And you," Tyrion said, "must stand between a dragon and a place where dragons like to put their feet. Do you intend to grow a second hand for the occasion?" "I intend to use the one I have," Jaime said, lifting the golden thing as if it were a cup. "And the things I know about men who pretend to be jars." Tyrion closed his eyes briefly. "I could drink to he said, "but I have reached the point in the day when my goblet gets offended if I ask it to do more than it has already done. Shall I be honest, Jaime? I have been practicing." "You have never needed practice to be honest," Jaime said. "You needed permission." "I do not forgive you," Tyrion said. "Not yet. Not on behalf of anyone. Not on behalf of her. Not on behalf of the city you tell me you have saved. Not on behalf of any boy who will never know who you were. Not on behalf of our father's bones. Not on behalf of the man who is asked to perform your intelligence while you perform everyone's courage. I do not forgive you, but I am relieved, and I will help you keep the city from tearing itself apart while it decides how to spell your new name." "That will be sufficient," Jaime said. They talked then like men who had once played at war with wooden swords and then learned that the wood had understood something about blood the boys had not. They spoke about supply. They spoke about the rumor in the fish market that a girl could cure boils with a look. They spoke about how the bells should be rung and who should stand by the ropes and when the signal should be given that would tell the ships to retreat or advance depending on what the sky did with the dragon's shadow. They spoke about names and about doors and, very briefly and with a softness neither man knew he had in him anymore, about the day they had seen their mother brush her hair and thought, "That is how a person forgives a life for not being ours." Night came fully. The palace did its tricks. The flip of the tapestry to hide the stain. The extra lamp in the corridor where lovers like to walk and pretend to be lost. Cersei's death had not yet rippled through the rooms the way such a thing will when the servants who notice everything have had time to add their verses. Qyburn came and bowed and told Jaime in a neutral voice that the preparations would begin at once and the public part could wait until the city had been told. He did not say who would tell it. He did not ask if there would be a coffin what size and of what wood and lined with what cloth. He did not mention the crown. He held his hands tucked into his sleeves like a novice learning the pleasure of keeping a dangerous word in his pocket. "Tomorrow," Jaime said, "at noon, the bells at the hour. The city will be told by men who do not look as if they intend to cry. The women will do the crying. Men will do the part where they find something to lift and lift it." "As you wish," Qyburn said. "And the little matter of succession?" Jaime looked at him as if he had been asked which color the sky had chosen and why. "There will be no little matters," he said, "only large ones, and we will not throw them all into the same sack." Qyburn bowed and left. Jaime set his hand against the wall and felt its lack of pulse. He turned and almost collided with a boy who had been hovering in the doorway. One of the runners he had sent to the docks. The child's eyes were bright with the tired pride of having learned something a man wants to hear. "She comes," the boy said. "Spies say she is 3 days away if the wind plays fair, 2 if it prefers her smile, maybe 1 if she asks. Ship seen, sails like teeth. You have a poet's friends," Jaime said. "Go sleep. Eat first. Eat something that will let you remember why." The boy fled, and Jaime realized that he had reached the hour when he had to do what he had been postponing since the moment in the window. A private inventory. He went to his chamber and dismissed the man who slept near his door to pretend a sword was a lullaby. He shut the door. He sat on the bed and placed his golden hand on the coverlet as if it had been invited as a separate guest. He drew the knife from his boot and cleaned it properly because even in grief there are tasks that require a man's exactness or else they will embarrass him later by their sloppy memory. He set the knife back and stared at the ceiling, which had acquired over the years the small cracks of a room that has learned to sigh. He thought about what he had done. He thought about everything at once and then about nothing because the mind is merciful when it is overwhelmed. He let himself feel, in increments, the earthquake he had caused. It arrived not as a crash but as a series of waves, like the river when a fat barge comes, each one slapping the stones with a little ceremony. He lay down and did not sleep. He closed his eyes and did not dream. He counted jars in his head and then abandoned counting because the numbers became faces and the faces did not behave. He heard the bells just before dawn. There is a way bells can be rung that does not ask for people to gather so much as it tells them to stand very still. The sound moved through the city like a hand dressed for morning. People woke. People who had not yet fallen asleep decided to do so anyway, briefly, as if the noise could be put on like a cloak that would prevent the draft from finding their chest. The city did what it always did when it did not yet know the name of the thing it must feel. It took inventory of its bread, its coin, its one good shirt, its impatience. Jaime rose and did the work of dressing a man who expects to be seen. He did not try to find words for the noon that was coming. He had learned that sometimes words are like horses hitched to a plow you do not intend to use. They tire themselves and you for nothing. He went to the room where the men had been last night and found them there again because men like that live in rooms like that when the days are dangerous. They spoke without making new decisions because the old ones had not yet proved themselves unworthy. He went where he was supposed to go and stood as he was supposed to stand, and when the hour arrived he walked into sunlight that had the indecent cheer of a market day. The steps before the September were full of those who had run to be near the noise. The city watched him with the same curiosity it had for a juggler who might drop a burning pin and set the day flaming. He stood with the men whose titles required them to stand and looked out over the heads and the hats and the small shadows of children perched on their fathers' shoulders, and remembered what the city had looked like from the fire-warmed heart of tunnels. He raised his hand. His golden fingers flashed. The crowd stilled in that way masses do when they feel something large enough to include them but not so large that it will crush them. "The queen is dead," he said, and the words walked into the air in their heavy boots. And the city bowed its head and then raised it and then bowed again because such words never fit properly the first time. He told them more, not everything. He had learned that the truth is a garment that must be tailored, but enough. He did not tell them that he had killed her. He did not lie either. He said, "I stopped a ruin." He said, "I have done this before." He said, She meant to save you in a manner that would have excused your absence from your own survival. He said, I love the city in a way that does not require it to love me back. He said, the dragon comes and we will not bark like dogs chained to our own doors. We will stand with dignity. We will not throw children into the river to lighten the boat. He said, prepare. He said, not yet. After, he stood and let the sound the crowd makes after a speech decide whether it was applause or thunder. He could feel the city learning how to believe him. He could feel it deciding where to put the word he had brought. He turned and went up the steps, because there was a body that waited and a ritual that needed a pair of brothers. The man he had been and the man he was trying to learn to be. Inside the September, the air was the thin kind that clung to stone as if it were underdressed. Cersei lay on a table that made anyone lying on it feel as if they belonged to a story that had begun better than it had ended. The women had done their work. The garments were precise. The face was calm in the way faces are when they have no choices left to make. Jaime approached and stood at her side and did the thing he had been rehearsing. He allowed grief to do something to his face that men would believe but not suspect. He let it curl the mouth and dim the eye and stiffen the throat. He did not lie to himself about it either. He was grief, but he did not need the city to know whether the grief was for her, or for himself, or for the possibility that had been burned not by wildfire but by human stubbornness. The High Septon said the words men and women have said for so long it no longer matters whether they believe them. The choir sang. The candles played at being little gods and then remembered they were only tallow and wick. Jaime stood and was a statue with knees. He looked at Tyrion, who stood by a pillar and drank water as if he had lived long enough to find that more helpful than wine. He looked at Qyburn, who folded and unfolded his hands inside his sleeves in the rhythm of someone telegraphing to himself. He looked at the men whose loyalty could be bought and the ones who had learned to hoard it like a cottage's winter wood. He stood until standing became a philosophy. After, in the cloister where stones learn near flowers how to be kind, he was approached by a woman from the street of silk, a person he did not know and would remember all his life. She had a face like a map that had been folded too often and too brutally, and eyes that were a good sea in bad weather. Sire, she said, I brought you something. He almost smiled. A joke rose and died because he had cultivated decent timing and knew better. What? He asked. This? She said, and handed him a lemon. He took it because he had been trained to take what the people give you when they are trying to tell you what they cannot say. He held it in his palm and felt it weigh almost nothing and drag the whole day downward. He nodded to her. She nodded back. They had an understanding. She would never tell anyone she had done this. He would remember when he had time and decide whether it had saved him a minute later. He tucked the lemon into his belt like a man who believes in charms. He went back to the palace through streets that were doing their best to resume their routine and not stare at what had been put in their mouths. He found the room where men said succession in a tone that made it sound like weather. He listened to them. He said only what he had to. He watched them. He reassigned two, removed one, promised another something he did not intend to give, because the city would not survive if he forgot that his kindness had limits. He sent ravens. He sent for bread. He drank water. He did not go to his bed because the city has a way of punishing men who sleep early on the day they have changed its fate. Toward evening, when the light had acquired a purple idea about itself, a messenger came breathless and ungainly with the news that the Dragon Queen had been seen from the East Watchtower. Her ship's a neat study in intimidation. The city absorbed this with the same care it gives to a new tax. It frowned. It invented a workaround. It told itself a story. It waited to see if the collector would be clever. Jaime stood on the wall and watched the approaches with Adam. The wind wore salt. The sky was a bruise whose fingers had not yet decided where to grip. Far off, it was possible to mistake ships for a tremble in the light, but the man who had learned to watch a battlefield like a gardener watches a gale saw them for what they were. Intention with sails. She will want you, Adam said. He meant, she will want your head and your story and your head with the story wrapped around it like ribbon. She will get me, Jaime said, but not the way she believes. You killed a queen, Adam said. It is a sentence that will eat its own tail. I killed a W. Oman who would have killed a city, Jaime said. I will say so, and I will say it to her face, and I will say it to the people who kneel for her, and I will say it to the men who want to claim I have robbed them of the part they wish to play in this tragedy. If she kills me for it, she does. If she crowns me with forgiveness, she does. If she does something clever, I will forgive her for surprising me. You have prepared the jars, Adam said cautiously. I have prepared the men, Jaime said. The jars I have been able to move we have moved. The jars that cannot be moved have had their strings cut. The men who knew where to pull have had their hands made idle by kindness or gold. The men who would rather light a city than their pipe have been removed from any place where a spark might fall. We have done what can be done. The rest is bargaining. Bargaining with dragons, Adam said. I hope you have brought small cows. Jaime smiled despite himself. He put his golden hand on the Merlin and watched the sky make up its mind. He thought, I will show her a city that has not forgotten how to be worth ruling. He thought, I will show her a man who knows his crimes and has decided to punish himself by living. He thought, I will not let the old whisper write my name. When the horns sounded at the harbor, they spoke not of panic but of dignity. It is possible to tell men to be brave if you know the right words. It is harder to tell a city. But a city can be taught if you offer it the right bribe. Jaime offered it time. He stood at the gate with Tyrion when the first envoys came under truce. He held out his hands, one living and one gold, and said, Let us talk. The men who came carried the dragon on their chests and in their eyes, and in the careful way they did not look at the sky so as not to invite it. They were polite the way men are when they intend to judge you later. They asked the questions. Jaime gave the answers that allowed the next question to be asked. They talked of duty and of debt and of the color red when it chooses to be a flag or a stain. They did not use the word forgiveness because that is a word for children and priests and men who expect to sleep at night. Why are the bells ringing? One asked. To tell the city to kneel, Jaime said, but not to ask whom they kneel for. That will be the next bell. And you? The man asked, with a neat contempt he had probably spent years learning how to apply so that it looked like frankness. Will you kneel when the queen arrives? I have kneeled twice, Jaime said. Once to a king I killed for this city. Once to a queen I killed for this city. Today I will stand. The man considered this, filed it under things to be discussed later with someone who likes arguments, nodded as if he had been served a dish correctly salted. They took their leave with the courteous efficiency of men whose lives depend on bookkeeping. Tyrion looked at Jaime and did not say the thing he was thinking, which was kind. Night grew. In it, smaller stories thrived. A cobbler used a scrap of velvet to patch a hole in his son's shoe. A boy tried to steal a fig and then put it back because his mother had recently taught him the name of hunger, and he had decided it was a word he did not want to wear yet. A girl in the street of Flower closed her eyes and listened and decided she had learned enough about bells for one day. A gate creaked and an old man with a cough looked at it and realized he had loved that sound for 50 years. Jaime returned to the room with the low ceiling where the maps lay like sleeping cats. He smoothed one corner that had curled in the humid air. He watched the lines that pretended to tell him what reality was, and then remembered that maps were always a kindness and sometimes a lie. He felt the lemon in his belt when he sat. He took it out and set it on the table and pressed the metal fingers of his golden hand into its skin lightly. The scent rose, sharp, clean, a small insistence that the world keeps secrets that are not all wicked. He leaned in and breathed it until his head was full of the courtyard and morning and the girl in the window and the question he had asked and the answer he had made. The door opened. Brienne stood there, tall as a promise no one thinks you can keep and beautiful as a fact discovered late in life to have been under your nose all along. Her hair had damp from the road's wind. Her armor had dust choosing its edges. Her eyes had the sky in them and something else that is harder to name until you notice that it is honor, and then you are embarrassed for taking so long to recognize it. I heard, she said. I hoped you would, he said. She looked at him for a long time and then at the lemon and then at the map and then back at him. You did what needed doing, she said. She did not make it a question. He lifted a shoulder. I did something. I will spend the rest of my days learning whether it was the only thing. She came into the room and closed the door and walked to the table and set her hand, not metal, upon the lemon, and the scent, once caged, leaped again, and the room confessed that it had forgotten to be solemn. Jaime waited for her to tell him he was damned. He had learned to respect her enough to expect it. She did not. There were fires laid, she said. She had the good habit of knowing the important fact as if she had been standing in the room when it was born. You stopped them from being fires. That is enough for this hour. The next hour will ask another question. Will you stand with me when I answer it? He asked. She smiled a small, difficult smile that had learned to avoid curving too far because the world had told it that would be littering. Where else would I stand? She said. He breathed. He did not realize he had been holding it until his chest decided to claim what belonged to it. The two of them stood over the map with the lemon between them and the world outside, learning how to pronounce the new day. The dragon ships would anchor tomorrow. The envoys would arrive again with cleaner phrases. The bells would ring and then ring again. Stories would be told in kitchens and at the baths and under the tarp in the alley outside a tavern where men pretend rain cannot find them. Children would be named. Lovers would quarrel. A city would perform its duty to be itself. Jaime let the future be large. He let it tower. He did not try to reduce it to a manageable animal. He stood with the smell of lemon in his head and Brienne's presence like a wall that had decided to help rather than hinder. He thought one more time of the moment in the window and understood with terrifying clarity that the rest of his life would be measured by the distance from that moment to whatever came next. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she said. He reached for the lemon and put it back in his belt. He folded the map even though he would need it again in an hour. He went to the window and looked at the city because he could not imagine not doing so. He saw it. The roofs like the backs of patient animals. The streets like threads pulled loose that no one would ever successfully put back. The lamps like eyes that had decided to stay awake with him. He said nothing to it. He did not ask it for forgiveness. He did not tell it what to do. He only watched, and by watching acknowledged that it was alive, and that he was too, and that between such facts there will always be a chain, and always someone who believes he knows the tug that will make it sing. The night took another breath and the sea answered and the palace shifted its weight on its haunches. Jaime turned from the window and walked back to the table and put his hand, his living hand, on the place where the map made the river look manageable. Brienne stood very still and waited, which is another kind of mercy. Somewhere in the palace a door opened and a servant began to run with a message that was ordinary and would become urgent by the time it reached the right ear. Somewhere in the city a woman blew out a lamp and sat in the dark with her hands quiet in her lap. Somewhere on the water a captain cursed the wind for its taste in drama. Somewhere in Jaime's chest the old whisper tried one last time to be useful and discovered it had been dismissed. The silence that followed felt like a beginning, not an end. He drew breath again. He had plans to make and men to watch and a brother to argue with and a dragon queen to meet and a name to accept. He had blood on his hands and lemon on his fingers. He had taken a life to save a city. He had taken his life and set it down like a cup waiting for wine. Tomorrow, he repeated, and as he said it the bells, obedient to no man's schedule but the one they had agreed among themselves, began to ring. They did not ring in a panic. They did not plead. They spoke. In the language of metal meeting air, they said, "Listen." He listened. He stayed listening for a long time, and in doing so, he made himself ready for a city that would not forgive him easily, and a woman with dragons who would not forgive him at all, and a future that would ask him to stand in more doorways than a man properly should. When the bells quieted, the rest of the night returned like a tide that had been persuaded not to leave the shore embarrassed. He sat and wrote, badly at first and then with a steadiness that surprised him, letters that said what needed saying and none of what would make them sentimental. He addressed one to a child who would not read it for years because the child did not yet understand that lives cast shadows you can read by. He addressed another to a man whose job it was to keep his enemies' pens dull. He addressed one to himself and sealed it and hid it in a place where future him would find it when he needed a reason to continue. Brienne slept briefly on a bench as knights sometimes do when they have become work rather than workers. Jaime watched her and did not allow his mind to try on the life in which they were farmers or retainers in a quiet keep or simply two human beings walking to market next to each other without an escort of history. He had learned not to tease himself with that kind of kindness. He sat, and when she started awake and reached for her sword and then remembered where she was, He nodded and said nothing and handed her a cup of water he had poured the way a squire does. She took it and drank and did not thank him, which felt like the appropriate kind of courtesy. Dawn found them still at the table. Dawn is a gossip, a child who wakes early to repeat what Night learned while the adults were sleeping. It put its hands on the windowsill and put its face against the glass and peered in, and saw 2 people and a lemon and some maps and a future that had decided to be heavy. And the dawn, being what it is, loved them all equally for an instant before it moved on to wake the rest of the neighborhood. Jaime stood, and his knee reminded him about getting older. He ignored it because there was no time for that particular conversation. He checked the straps of his armor and blessed the armorer for choosing discipline over pity. He set his golden hand on the table and let it drum once, a small steady sound. He looked at Brienne. She looked at him. They did not make a speech about honor. They had lived long enough to know that speeches about honor often arrive where honor is least welcome. They stepped into the hall and made their way toward the day. The palace offered them the familiar sequence of corridors and archways, and the place where one must duck without admitting why. Servants had put out flowers, and the flowers had picked up the hint and pretended to be brighter than they were. The smell of baking had learned the way to their floor. Men nodded and did not say the thing they wanted to say because words in such moments have learned to be shy. They crossed the last threshold before the St. Eps and the light hit them and the city opened like a mouth. It is a rare thing to see a place decide to survive. It makes a sound, not easily described. It is, perhaps, the quiet between bells and orders. It is men standing in squares that want to be markets and not battlefields. It is women tying their hair back in a way that means they intend to manage today. It is children learning to stare with dignity. It is the river saying, "I will carry what I must and not more." It is a man with a golden hand and another with scars and a woman with a sword and a dwarf with a goblet and all of them guilty as sin and proud as saints. And it is an army on the horizon and a queen with a past and a future and a city surrounded by its own stories. And somewhere a lemon tree breathing as if it had been paid to. Jaime took the first step down, and then the second. He could feel the story begin to assemble itself in the crowd. There is the man. There is the man who killed a queen. There is the man who did it to save us. There is the man who has done this before. There is the man whose face we will try to explain to our children when they ask why we are still here to explain anything at all. He let them think it. He let it be true for them and left it raggedly true for himself. He did not ask for more. At the base of the steps, Tyrion waited with a face that had spent the night learning a new vocabulary. "The envoys," he said softly. "They want to speak to the man who killed the fire before it grew old enough to give itself a title." "I am ready," Jaime said, and he was, in the only way a man ever is. They walked forward. The bells, in their towers, those priests of metal and will, watched the city and, deciding the time had come for a different tone, prepared their tongues. The wind came from the sea, and in it was the scent of salt and tar and dragon. The sun did the thing it does every morning in every city, and yet had decided to do particularly well today. The lemon in Jaime's belt was a weight as light as hope. He did not touch it. He did not need to. He tasted it on the air and thought of a room and a window and a woman and a choice, and he did not look back. He stepped into the day as if it had been made to fit him, which is another way of saying he stepped into it the way a man does when he has decided to stand until he is told, by something larger than himself, to kneel.